pay attention to the things you can't let go of. You know, the ideas, the things that energize you, the things that when you can't, you know, like if there's a headline in the news about it, you're like, oh, I want to read more about that. Or if there's conversation happening, you find yourself drawn to it and participating. Like, what are those things that really energize you, that you care deeply about and that are consistently showing up for you?
What happens when you lock onto and fully commit yourself to a big idea that matters so much that you can't let go of it? That's what we're talking about in today's episode, because I reckon we can live a life where we go along as a bit of a leaf in the wind and just respond to what life throws at us, or we can decide to do something that really matters. But that takes conviction and courage and commitment, and it's scary and it takes a long time and there's costs. You know, I'm reminded of Goethe's quote, the German philosopher, who said, until one is committed, there's hesitancy, the chance to draw back. Then he goes on to say, but that moment that one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too, and all sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. And that's the spirit of our conversation today, where we dig into what does it take to lock onto conviction, and what happens when we commit ourselves, and how does the world change? And our guest is a shining example of that. Hi, I'm Digby Scott, and this is Dig Deeper, a podcast where I have conversations with depth that'll change the way you lead. My guest today is Gillian Brookes. Gillian started her own consultancy business back in 2019. Remember back then? Just before the world changed, COVID came along and we all began to work from home. And guess what? One of Gillian's areas of expertise is in making flexible work work. Talk about perfect timing. Her business exploded during that time and she hasn't looked back. And she's channeled her experience of supporting leaders and organizations into her book, Flexperts, and she continues today to push the boundaries to create a better future of work for everyone. Now, Gillian is also my life partner. Let's put that out there right now. So to me, what I've always admired about her and what she brings that continues to inspire me is that she dreams big. Ever since we met quite a few years ago, her mind goes well beyond the status quo. And I think that'll come through in our conversation today. She's also got a relentless curiosity, and her questions always stop me in my tracks and get me thinking and learning. And it's an awesome experience, sometimes a little uncomfortable. She's also one of the lowest ego people I know, and she always lets her courage and conviction be her guide. Gillian Brookes, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Digby.
Let's put it out there. What does it feel like to be life partners and doing this podcast conversation with a whole lot of people listening?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because on one level, it's just me and you having a conversation, which is obviously something we do a lot. And also, we've been working together for a long time, you know, and we, you know, and some people say to us, oh, how do you work together and be partners? You know, it's actually, we've never not done that. So it sort of feels okay because of the nature of the work we've done together so far anyway. So, it's sort of weirdly familiar territory.
That's a good way to put it, isn't it? It feels like, just another one of our conversations.
Yeah.
So we just decided to press record. So let's see where it goes.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah, as ever, right? Let's see where we take things.
Yeah.
I was really curious to hear your thoughts about, now we're recording this a couple of days after the US presidential election results in 2024. And, you know, the world's in an interesting state right now, you know, not just because of that, but generally, right? What's fascinating to you right now as you look around the world that you're in? You know, what's drawing your attention and piquing your curiosity?
Yeah. It's funny. I was reflecting on that, particularly in light of the US election, like you point out. And I was kind of surprised by my emotional response to that election result. I thought I would be I'd have quite a high emotional response to that. And actually I didn't. And what I did notice though was that I felt even more committed to the things that I want to see change in the world, that there feels like there's no better time than now or yesterday to make some of the changes that I and many other people care about. And the way I would sort of summarize that, if there was a way to summarize it, is changing the way that our economy works and who it serves.
I think that's really more.
Yeah. So I think, before I became a flexible work specialist and got into HR, I trained as an economist, and as an economics graduate, I found my way into an HR career. And the way I've made sense of what I care most about is how do we restructure our economy so that it has better outcomes for people and planet. And my focus, because of my skills and my area of expertise and what I care most about, is the people focus that I'm really have more fluency in, and want to make space and create opportunities to learn about the planet side of it too. I think one of the things I've been thinking a lot about over the last few years is how can I contribute to making that change? How can I contribute to being a really small part of having an economy that works really well for everybody? And my contribution to that so far has been really, how do we make work high quality and really accessible to more people?
What's the problem with the world right now? Because your response was, this is what I want to change. What's the problem that you're trying to solve?
I think what we're seeing is a growing sense of not a growing sense, but growing inequality. And with a growing inequality of wealth and income, with no developed economy more pronounced in that than the US, and then seeing what's happening in the US, it's just shining a light for me on, we really need to pay attention to the haves and the have-nots. And it's the magnitude of that gap that's the problem. It's not necessarily that, everyone needs to be a millionaire, or everybody I'm not kind of
so we're not talking communism.
Communism. Yeah, exactly. We're not talking about like everyone needs to have the same, but what we need to pay attention to, I think, is that sense of, everyone has a fair chance at a life of dignity and a life of well-being, and when I talk about well-being, as you know, I think about Amartya Sen, and he's the founding father of well-being economics, a Nobel Prize winner and very smart guy. And what he talks about is that that's about living a life that you value and have reason to value. And it's really hard to live a life that you value if you can't have access to anything that you value. And so I think we need to focus our attention on creating that as a possibility for everybody. And we're not there yet. In fact, we're potentially moving away from it in some senses. So that's what I'm doubling down on.
It's interesting the word well-being, and that has really come to prominence in the last few years, hasn't it? And I think originally it was sort of like the fruit bowls in the staff kitchen and the yoga at lunchtime and bean bags and all that sort of stuff. But what's your sense of, have we matured from that, as workplaces, the sense of like what well-being actually means?
Yeah. She said.
That's a very qualified, yeah.
I think we've moved beyond fruit bowls, which is great. I think what we've moved towards, away from fruit bowls, is well-being initiatives. And I still find that a bit, for those of you who are not watching this, who are listening, I just made a face. I think wellbeing initiatives, they're so well intentioned. And so I want to applaud the intent behind a wellbeing initiative, and people will go and do a survey or something similar. But the problem with a survey is you end up going for the middle of the bell curve with everything. And the point about well-being is it's individualized. It's a life that I value and have reason to value. It's not necessarily something I'm going to willingly share in a survey with my employer. It's not necessarily something I can even articulate very well. What I need is access to be able to explore what I value and have reason to value. And I need my employer to not get in the way of that at the very least, and to enable it if and where possible. So wellbeing initiatives and surveys can really kind of miss the whole founding principle of what wellbeing is all about.
There's, I'm listening to you now, and I'm feeling your conviction, right? And it's fascinating having watched your last few years since you last launched your consultancy practice, and at the moment you're everywhere, media and LinkedIn and everything. And this conviction comes through in everything you share. And it's true right now, right? Have you always been that way? Tell us about that, because I feel like it's stronger than ever. And I'm wondering, what's the seeds of it? Like, where is this coming from for you?
Yeah, it's such a good question. You should probably ask my mum.
Maybe I will.
Yeah. If it's always been there, I think she would say, yep, would be my guess.
What do you reckon she would have seen in, the 5-year-old Gillian or the 10-year-old Gillian?
Yeah, I think she experienced, I'm the youngest of 3, and I think I came along a little bit after my brother and my sister. There was a bigger gap between us. And so my older brother and sister there's only a couple of years between them, and they were really close. And then there's about over 6 years before I turned up. And then, so I think I was a bit of I wasn't a surprise baby, but I think I was a surprise child in the way that I was quite different. And that mum would be like, I remember we'd be in the car sometimes, and I'd be like, well, what do you think about this? And in the end, she'd just say, oh, Gillian, why don't you become a politician or something? I don't know. She's just like, I don't know. And she'd just be tired and, finish work. And it was just, I think she found me a bit relentless sometimes with my constant questions. And what about this? And why don't we change that? And I remember saying to her, who are they? When everyone talks about they need to do this and they need to do that, I was like, who are they talking about? Who do people mean when they say they? And that's when that was the first time I ever heard about government, actually. And she said, oh, they normally mean government. I was like, what's government? So I was just sort of super curious kid, I think, and really wanted to understand what was driving people, what motivated people, and what they were angry about, and all that kind of thing. So I think that was just innate in me. And then I think, the other kind of shaping forces really is my dad was an entrepreneur. He had his own business, and, there was a whole heap of shaping experiences, right, as children. And I think watching him grow as I was growing up, I loved the idea of, I loved going into his office and, looking at what he was doing and what would he spend his time doing, and, who was he meeting and what was all that about and what was it for? And he was running an electrical contractor business. And so I was like trying to make the connection between his office and what work they were doing, what projects they were on, and and what was an invoice? I was just kind of loved that.
And how old were you at this stage?
I would have been probably 8, 9, something like that, going into the office with him and trying to, just, I guess it was kind of business studies for primary school. And so that was really fascinating. But, the other shaping forces of that were, I think, going through the recession in the early 90s, that was a huge, huge impact for me personally, because my dad's business didn't survive that experience of the recession. There was a massive cash flow kind of issue. And really tragically, he took his own life in 1993 when I was only 11 years old. And, growing up, although I was fascinated with, the entrepreneurialism and what that was all about, I didn't get to see much of my dad. He was always off out early in the morning. He was home late. I would see him, but there was definitely not a shared parenting between my two parents.
Right.
And then conversely, mum had, she worked in various different jobs, but her employer after dad died, they used to give everybody Friday afternoons off. And that was brilliant because me and mum didn't, she was working full time. We didn't get to spend that much time together. It was me and the dog at home a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. So Friday afternoon, she'd be home. And when I got home from school, and that was so nice, we'd go off and do things together and stuff. So I kind of had these two very different role models in my upbringing from my two parents. And, one was kind of sparked the entrepreneurial thing, but also some of the risks and dangers around that of, quite heavy risks, obviously. And also the not seeing him, kind of very often and all the hours he was working versus my mum's experience where, yes, she was working full time and that was hard, but we had Friday afternoons, which was lovely, and a weekend. So I was kind of thinking, how do you make work kind of healthy for everybody?
Yeah.
So that we can all thrive and that, that the economic impact doesn't have such a traumatic experience like it did for me and my family when, unfortunately, dad didn't survive the recession either. Yeah.
How has, there's so much that helps me understand you in that story. How do you reckon it shapes not so much how you work and what your work's about, but how you live and how you parent and how you get all of the bits in sync, or at least try to?
Yeah. Well, it's taken me a few goes to learn a few hard lessons, I would say. I've probably experienced burnout 3 times over, during my employed life. So, I'm not very good at learning lessons quickly.
Well, it keeps coming back at you until you actually learn it, right?
It's like, come on, Julian, you're not cracked it yet. Have another go.
Do that exam again.
Yeah, exactly.
Repeat the paper.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a bit frustrating when you have to do it 3 or 4 times. But I think, what I know about myself is that I have to work quite hard on sustaining my energy. Making sure that I don't fall into the trap where perhaps my dad did, which is that work takes over. I've been really, obviously since the age of 11, that was a tough lesson for all of us in my family, that, work mustn't become the sole focus of your world.
Yeah.
And that there's got to be more to life than just work.
I've always admired that about you. And as someone who, like many, many people listening, I suspect, work plays such a central part to my life. I feel like I'm really starting to change that mix only now. But for you, I remember you saying one time to me a few years ago, it was like 2:30 in the afternoon. You went, I've done my work for the day. I'm going to have a bath. Because I can, right? Which is one of the upsides of being self-employed, right? But there's also massive risks with self-employment around, you could just work 24/7.
Yeah.
And you've been really deliberate in going, nah. And your formative stories about your parents as role models clearly has influenced that, right?
Oh, massively. Yeah. I think, I was at a conference event thing yesterday, and I was talking to someone afterwards, and I was saying one of the things about becoming self-employed was that I had to, just before I made the choice, I was like, I remember saying to myself, like, the buck stops with you now. I can't blame a toxic work culture. I can't blame my boss for being hard on me. I can't, blame someone else for unreasonable demands or a lack of resourcing or whatever else it might be, that I was really practiced at those excuses and those, I mean, sometimes they're excuses and sometimes they felt very real. And I'll probably never know where in that spectrum a lot of them were in reality, but probably a mix of all. But I think stepping into self-employment, it was really important for me to just face up to that and be really clear with myself that I can't blame anyone else if this starts to impact my own health and well-being. So I've really got to make some healthy choices.
Yeah. And you do, right? And there's costs that come with that. But a lot of people that are listening to this, I suspect, are employed. And, you know, we've both been there. What lessons did you learn, if any, from when you were employed about how to sustain your energy? Because you talked about the lessons that you had to learn a few times. And I'm wondering, did it take to going self-employed to finally learn that lesson, or were there lessons that, you know, you learned at the time or you'd wish you'd learned when you were employed?
I think one of the things I got, despite the, you know, slightly mild versions of burnout that I experienced on more than one occasion, I think one of the things I did get quite practiced at was boundaries. And particularly once I became a working parent, I think I had to, I was a senior leader with 2 young children and a lot of delivery pressure with a big team under me. And I remember one particular role as HR director, the first 6 weeks, I had to just almost several times a day, my boundaries would get challenged.
Give us an example.
So, for example, like in that particular role, I worked compressed hours, so I could have Fridays where I took the kids to their play group and all that kind of thing. And so I worked 4 really long days. That's kind of how I did it. And then just kind of answered the odd email or whatever on the Friday. But I remember I was only kind of like a few days in and everyone knew what my work hours were. I've been really clear with everybody, had one-to-ones with all my new team. And there was something that was meant to be on a Friday. And I was like, well, I won't be there. I'll be at playgroup. And they're like, oh, can't you just bring the kids in? I was like, no, I'm at playgroup. I'm not going to be there. We'll have to reschedule it. And they'd be like, oh, okay. And they could reschedule it. It was fine. It wasn't like this big external meeting that could never be shifted because it would take, 6 months to reschedule it all or whatever with the right people. It was just easier not to from their point of view.
Right.
But actually what I had to get really good at was just reminding people what I could do and what I couldn't do. And people kind of got it, but it took about 6 weeks of constantly pushing back and then people got it. But it's those 6 weeks when you're new to a role and it's a big job and you've got a lot going on at home as well. That's exhausting, absolutely exhausting.
What helped you to say no firmly in the first place? Because I can imagine me, and maybe people listening might be in the same boat, feeling a sense of guilt or torn loyalties or I'm not being a good employee or whatever.
Yeah.
When I'm saying no, what helped you to stay firm?
I think it's that I wasn't firm on everything, there were places where I was really comfortable being flexible, but that wasn't one of them. And so I could explain that to people and they could see that and experience that from me. So that helped. And also I didn't really have an alternative. I was like, if I bring a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old to this meeting, that's just no one's going to get anything out of this, and I don't have my sister around the corner or someone I can just drop the kids off with. I moved here and my children were born here. I moved here from the UK in 2011. So, there was no alternative option on a Friday. I didn't have childcare arrangements. I didn't have someone in my family who I could just ask for a favor or whatever. So it was kind of like, well, this is the deal.
I've just written a blog this morning. Thank you for your help on reviewing it. Called Give Less Fucks. Right. Yeah. And it's the message in that is don't not give a fuck about anything, but give less fucks about the things that matter less.
Yeah.
And I think that sifting, that parsing, that trying to work out what matters less, it's easier when, like you say, like you didn't have a choice, right? Well, what am I going to do? It's that's when it's easy to go, no, because this matters. It's kind of like in times of crisis, we can all rally around the most important things, right? But when we're not in times of crisis and everything's a bit grayer, it's harder to discern what matters, and our heads and our shoulds and our have tos get in the way, right? And I admire how you had that clarity, and you have that clarity in lots of things, right? And the conviction that is there behind that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, that conviction comes from a couple of places. It's that kind of that childhood story about kind of don't let work take over completely. And then there's also the idea that when you're the head of HR, if I can't make it work as a senior leader in a business, who can?
Yeah.
And who's coming through the pipeline that I want people to look to someone like me and see that it's not easy, but it's possible at the very least. And, and I took that seriously as well, that, as a head of HR, it's almost like an extra part of your job to show people what's possible in terms of different ways of working and healthy ways of working.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I love the way you say, show people what's possible, right? And I think that's, live through your own values, your own choices, and, be the change.
Yeah.
But if you want to see something different, well, embody it yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Who do or did you model your own leadership style on? So I suspect you've had lots of people guiding you in your own journey, right? Who's helped?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it took me a while to kind of really, really understand the idea of you've got to be yourself as a leader. And that kind of, I was lucky. I was lucky to have, after my first burnout, which was kind of only 2 years after graduation.
But I just think it's hilarious. It's like after my first burnout.
Yeah.
It's like the serial burnout person.
I know. Oh, it was awful. Like the reason I'm laughing is because the first main leader I had, like as a grad, she was definitely herself, but that wasn't great.
So there's be yourself, but be the good version.
Yeah. And she was incredibly controlling in every aspect of her own life. And we all experienced that from her as a leader, which was really intense and really quite scary at times. And she would reduce all my much older, more experienced colleagues to tears regularly. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, how am I going to manage in this? And the short story of that is that I didn't. I didn't handle it very well at all.
How old were you at this time?
22 to 24, something like that, 23. Right. Yeah.
So you didn't handle that.
Not particularly, no. I mean, I just got burnt, and kind of the naivety of kind of stepping into a corporate world with someone who wasn't a very healthy role model, really, and without the support that you need at that early stage in career to really succeed.
What did that feel like?
It felt like you've been sort of it started out really well, but quite quickly when the heat was on her, suddenly the heat was on me, and that I'd never experienced that before. I think I'd always looked at adults and I'd put trust in adults around me, and that I'd never really been betrayed in that way before. And so it was my first experience of the adult world where that trust was misplaced. And that was really painful, especially as a 23-year-old, in your first kind of corporate job post, so I was on a graduate program, and that was really not a pleasant experience, but I'm kind of in a way grateful it happened so early on.
Yeah.
Because, it really fueled my interest and my fascination for HR. I left that job. The next boss I had was brilliant. She was hilarious. She was really herself. She was really supportive. She supported me to do my first kind of HR professional qualification, because I'd had my economics degree, but hadn't really kind of hit on HR quite yet. I was just kind of getting to that point. So she really supported that. And I remember when I was doing my, I did it at night school at college, and
this is your HR.
My HR qualification, my first HR qualification. And what I was learning all this stuff about what good HR looks like and what good people leadership looks like. And it was the antithesis of what I'd just experienced in my graduate role.
Yeah.
And that was fascinating to me, because I could suddenly see the power of having really good HR.
What a gift.
It was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. And
don't you reckon, just as a sidebar perhaps, that we want to have those shitty experiences earlier in career and learn from them? I had my midlife crisis at 30 and, it was a horror. I had a massive burnout as a national manager, and I'm so grateful. Obviously, hindsight is a good thing. It took me years to recover my mojo from that. But I reckon we want to go and have as many learning experiences, shall we say, as we can, and get exposure to a whole range of things. Yeah. It's like David Epstein wrote this book called Range, why generalists will triumph in a specialized world, because it gives us exposure to stuff that we can then go, well, what do I take from that experience? And ideally the consequences aren't as high when we're younger too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds like your story is one of those. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's that kind of, it helped me see what wasn't in place and what good leadership could
what do they call it
when it was done well.
Negative space, right?
Yeah.
The designers call it negative space, right? It's the stuff that's not there makes what's there useful, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it really motivated me, I think, to want to be a really good quality HR professional, so that I could shape a culture of an organization so that people experience good leadership, and the leadership was well supported to enable that for them, for themselves and their team.
And was well-being on the radar back then?
Not as a word, probably conceptually it was there.
Yeah.
I think conceptually it had been there a long time, but the way I came to well-being was much later, as I continued to kind of look into what was developing in the world of economic thinking. So people like Kate Raworth with Donut Economics, which is one of my favorite pieces of work out in the world. So, and Catherine Trebek and lots and lots of other new economic thinkers who, funnily enough, there's a high proportion of women.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Mariana Mazzucato would be another one.
Catherine Henderson. Rebecca Henderson.
Rebecca Henderson. Yes, we got that.
Yeah.
What do you reckon that's about?
I think for me it's something that Katrine Marcel talks about in her work, another kind of economic thinker who looks at economics through the lens of gender, particularly through the lens of feminism. And one of the things that she talks about is traditional economic thinking has led to systems and structures where we value masculine more than we value feminine. And actually, one of the wonderful things about her work is she talks about feminine ideas are actually universal ideas. They've just been kind of misbranded.
What's an example of that?
So an example that she would give is wheels on a suitcase. Who doesn't want wheels on the bottom of their suitcase?
Is there such a thing as a suitcase without wheels?
Well, there certainly was. If you go back to the 70s, she was like, "Why did it take us so long to put wheels on the bottom of a suitcase? And what's this masculine identity thing? Men don't want to be hauling suitcases around any more than anyone else." But finally we've put wheels on the bottom of a suitcase, which hadn't really taken off until she takes that story.
Can you just make the link between a masculine idea and the feminine idea there? Like, what's the distinction? So the idea. So if I'll take another example that she gives in one of her books, which is the electric car. So back when cars were, starting to be mass produced, there was an electric car and there was a petrol engine car. And this is back in what, the late 1800s?
Oh, this is like 100 years, just over 100 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So about sort of early 1900s.
Right.
And so what she was saying was that the petrol engine car was kind of, had the masculinity of, all the noisy machinery and the moving parts and everything. And then the electric car was seen as quiet and feminine. And it had, it was designed for a lady, a very wealthy lady, to go in and visit her friends for tea. And it even had like a sofa in the back so that they could sit and have tea in the car. And, it was all very la-di-da kind of thing. Whereas the idea that took off was the masculine engine, but actually when they used to crank up the engine at the front with what's it called? The arm thing that you use to crank it with.
Yeah, the cranking arm. It's called the cranking arm.
The cranking arm. There we go.
Yeah,
there we go. Who knew? That, some people used to get severely injured and even killed by these things kind of not going very well and flying off and hitting them in the side of the head and things like that. They were actually quite dangerous. They were smelly. They were noisy. But that was what men's machines looked like and felt like and sounded like. Whereas this electric car was marketed to wealthy women only. And that was the idea. It was a feminine version of the car. So we could have had a completely different future if actually the idea of the electric ignition, the idea of a covered car, you don't have to get wet in the rain, that it's quieter, that these are actually universal ideas.
So you
They're
said
not feminine.
Feminine ideas are universal ideas. It sounds like feminine ideas are sensible ideas.
Oh, well, I'm glad you said that, not me.
So guys just kind of like, they overshadow sensible with ego or something.
Well, I don't think so. I think, you and I talk about this frequently, don't we? But it's this whole idea that everybody, regardless of gender, is living under a patriarchal system. And actually men don't love it either. What man really wants to be getting wet, getting injured or killed by their car when they could have something else that's much more comfortable, quiet and safe? Like, most men don't want toxic masculinity either. It's just, we've got so much unlearning to do. And what I think Katrine Marcel does so well is just shines a spotlight through a few important examples of, how we've kind of adopted some of these ideas and we haven't fully understood the gender and the gender association with some of them. And I to bring it back to what we were talking about before, is the ideas of new economic thinking are often considered, let's bring in the idea of craft, which is more of a feminine idea, not just mechanics, which is a more masculine idea. Let's bring in the idea of work-life balance, which is a feminine idea, versus working all the hours God sends, which is a masculine idea.
And I talk in my work a lot about hero versus host and as ways of leading. And even if you think about the word hero, it's associated with masculinity, right? Whereas host is a more of a feminine idea. And it's interesting that seems to be something that people really latch onto, this, we need to shift from hero to host. And it's not we being females saying that, as everyone is saying that. And so that's another example of this. This is fascinating to me. How do we get more of this feminine ways of thinking into society? What are you doing, in an organizational sense or at a societal level to to help us make some of these shifts?
Well, I think, one example is that flexible work or part-time work, they're considered feminine, but actually it turns out they're universal. And we've learnt that post-pandemic because there's an absolute explosion of demand for flexibility regardless of gender.
Right. Yeah.
So that in itself is a really important one. And if I kind of drill down on that a bit further, for example, in construction as an industry, which is a very masculine dominated industry, that has some really, really sobering mental health statistics. How can we create more choices and more flexibility for the workforce there so that the industry benefits through better productivity and the work gets done more, kind of to schedule and all these things are, more reliably done?
I've got to say, yeah.
Because people have got more input and choice over their hours and days of work.
And as a dad, it's, to me, that's really important. And one of the reasons I work for myself is because the last time I had a salary, the second last time I had a salary, there was no way I could get the flexibility that I needed to with a young family. And it was like, well, that's not worth the cost to me because I'd already done my early midlife crisis burnout. I'd worked out what was important to me.
Yeah.
And like you had decided that there was no other choice. And,
yep.
and I reckon there's more guys who want this than ever. I
Absolutely.
think the values they're changing.
I think you're right. And I think, when I've I've done lots of work already, in the construction industry and spoken to so many guys at all different levels, all different professions within it. And I think we're there. The tipping point is there. There are so many voices, so many people across different generations of men who want more choices about their work. They don't feel like their marriages are going to survive it. They don't feel like their role as a dad is going to survive it otherwise. They don't feel like their participation in their community is going to survive it. These are things that really matter to people. And just because they happen to be really skilled in their professional career in construction, why should they be denied those choices too?
Yeah. I want to take either a rewind or a right turn or something here and come back to conviction because just, if you're listening to this, rewind the last 30 seconds and listen to the strength in Gillian's voice, right? There is so much conviction. Now, when I met you, we met 8 years ago or something.
Well, I think it's 10, but yeah.
10 years. 10? Was it 10? Well, I'm sorry. And you had energy and you had passion, but that clarity of conviction, I would say, wasn't as strong then, right? You then joined Changemakers, the program that I set up, what was that, 7-8 years ago?
Yeah.
And that was a turning point. Can you just tell us what helped you shift from all that restless energy, as I would call it, into the clarity of conviction that you've got now?
Yeah. And I think this is kind of stuff that you and I have always worked on is what can you not let go of? I think that's kind of what I learned to pay attention to.
I love that question.
Because and I speak to so many people about these same ideas, just like I said yesterday when I was at this kind of conference event thing, I was talking to someone about it there. And she was like, how did you write a book? I'd love to write a book. And I was like, well, what do you want to write it for? And she was like, well, just because I want to see if I can write one. And I said, well, that's not going to be enough.
Oh, harsh.
Yeah, well, it's true though, right? Because I was like, well, there's a reason you haven't done it yet. And so I was like, what do you care enough about that the motivation is innate within you? Because writing a book is a really hard process and it's beautiful, it's wonderful, and it's really hard. And so the motivation has to be so strong, way bigger than I want to just tick that off of my kind of bucket list of things I've achieved. It's got to come from something bigger than yourself, I think.
So what was that process for you? Because, I remember there was a point, and maybe you're better off telling the story than me, but when you went, oh, I've got to resign from what I'm doing.
Yeah, that was the end of our the first Changemakers workout I ever went to. I resigned from my job. I think, I think the process, if I get really clear about how you work out what that innate motivation
is. It. Yeah. What is the process?
What are the seemingly disparate ideas or things that you cannot let go of that really matter to you? So there's lots and lots of things that you can do, but what do you have to do? So for me,
it's almost like what you cannot not do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's those things that really, if they're not present in your current day job, but they're the things that give you the most energy when you're not working, or that you find opportunities to do anyway, even though it's not part of your job.
That makes sense. It's another way to put it is what would your mum get sick of you banging on about? Or your best friends, or whatever, right? The stuff that you just keep talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And pay attention to those things. And if they're seemingly disparate, which they probably will be, that's my experience. And, now running, where we do Changemakers together a lot of the time, working with lots of other people through the Changemakers process, most people find that, oh, hang on, I've got this. So for me, I had, the HR profession and our potential to have a bigger impact, a better impact in organizations was one thing. Another thing that felt really disconnected was economic inequality. Like, what did that have to do with HR?
Yeah,
and,
right.
A few, the plight of working parents. What was, that was a really big thing for me, how to make work for people that had kids, and that, why was that so hard? So I had these sort of seemingly quite disparate things, but by testing and learning and seeing if I could let them go, and no, I can't let that one go, but I can let that bit go. That's kind of, I can do that, but it doesn't kind of have the same energy vibe for me.
Yeah.
By kind of a process of elimination like that, you get hold of the threads that you will not let go of, and then you have to learn to thread them. And what are the ideas that connect them? Well, it's kind of, so for me, that's why reading about Kate Raworth and the donut economics ideas, which is really, how do you have an economy that serves people and planet first, rather than people and planet serving the economy, which is kind of what we're the status quo. How do we shift to it for the inverse? Now that captured my imagination in a way that lots of other things just don't hold my attention. They might give me that initial spark, but that was something that just felt really important to me, particularly as a kind of a graduate of economics, and then all these other questions. There was something about that brought everything together, and that helped me see that the ideas of economic inequality and the idea of working parents and the idea of better organizations for people would all sit within this one idea that Kate Raworth was able to illustrate and bring to life for me, which articulated what I'd been intuiting and feeling, but just hadn't found the words for yet until she came up with that.
And then something clicked for you. What did that do when it clicked? Obviously, resign from the job. But, a lot of people say, "Whoa, that's incredibly courageous," but it feels like from the outside, well, from looking at it, it was like you couldn't not do that. You had to do that. What was the shift in you in terms of how you then thought or behaved? What happened when you kind of locked on to that conviction?
So when I really understood that, deeply understood it, not just you get that immediate insight, but then I had to kind of really sit with it. And once it really got kind of deep inside under my skin, I was then able to make some deep choices and decisions about how central do I want this to be in my working life and in my day to day. And so because I had that entrepreneurial thing, from, if I go back to my childhood and watching the good side of my dad's experiences, I wanted an expression of that in my life too. I wanted to kind of try the entrepreneurial life, but I wanted to do it in a way that contributed to something and gave me a healthy relationship with my own work, and that also helped other people have that kind of healthy relationship with their work too. And so rather than kind of become self-employed for the sake of it, I had real purpose in what I wanted to do with my business. So rather than just become kind of an HR generalist and pick up contracts and whatever, I was like, no, I'd rather have a day job than do that. What I really want is to go and solve a couple of these big problems, like how do we redesign flexibility in our work so that we can make more of it. And the other thing I was doing back in 2019 before the pandemic took over was also, how do we restructure pay so that when, as a profession, as an HR profession, we're no longer exacerbating the gap between the highest and lowest paid in our societies, because that's becoming unsustainable and unaffordable.
It seems to me, just rewinding slightly, you really made some meaning out of your life experiences that are forming your present and your future. You've taken the time to go, what's happened to me and what meaning do I make out of that? And that's fueled your focus.
Yeah.
And that I geek out on this stuff because I'm so much about purposeful leadership and being purposeful in the world, and being here to do something that's not just about writing a book because I think I can, right? It's like in service of something bigger, right? And you embody that. How is your life different since you've locked on to that conviction and really committed to it? Like how is maybe the question is, how is the quality of your life different compared to, say, 10, 12, 15 years ago?
Yeah. Well, I think there's no longer that kind of disconnection between, kind of work life being, it drives this set, this kind of set of experiences that they're fine. It pays the bills. It's, I enjoy leading other people, blah, blah, blah. But actually the stuff I really enjoy is like outside of work. It's much more integrated than that now, where it feels like, sorry, we're laughing because we talk about this quite a lot, don't we? The whole.
Well, let's explain it now. We don't want this to be an inside joke, right? Let's make it an outside joke.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think you're my model integrator for sure. There's no one more integrated than you in the world.
I'm assuming that's a compliment, but yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so what is an integrator? For those of you who don't know,
is someone who permeates the boundaries between work and home, and they'll also move those boundaries around to suit them. The point there is to suit them. Like, like they'll make they make their choices themselves, not by obligation, but by kind of positive decision making.
And what's the alternative if you're not an integrator? You are
is a segmenter. Yeah, a segmenter who's more likely to have behavioural and physical boundaries between work and home.
Right. And neither are better than one's not better than the other.
No, definitely not. And I'm definitely more segmented than you are, but I don't think that's very hard.
I'm at the end of a bell curve. And you were saying that you do feel more integrated though, right? And that's when we started laughing.
I think that's because naturally I'm more of an integrator in my hard wiring. It's just life circumstances, having two children who are still at school and all that kind of thing means that I need to keep some life things separate from work because, that's just healthy and the right thing to do when you've got caring responsibilities.
If I'm hypothetically, say I'm a segmenter, can I still find conviction and purpose and meaning in my work?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. It's just that the way that will play out for you might feel different. And that you might be more deliberate about, well, this is how it expresses itself in my work life, and this is how it expresses itself in my community. This is how it expresses itself at home, and that's completely legitimate. Yeah.
So overall, life feels what I'm hearing is life feels richer now that you've locked on to this meaningful conviction for what you're here to do.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
If you were to give advice to someone who's going, I don't think I've locked on to whatever that conviction is for me, but I want to, what would you say? Here's one thing you can start to do.
Sorry, I'm smiling because I hate giving unsolicited advice, but I'll take this as solicited advice.
Well, I'm on behalf of the listener that may be dying to ask this question, right? So I'm here in service of you, listener.
Yeah. I think. Sorry, repeat the question again. I got really hung up.
If you were to give one piece of advice, solicited, to someone who's like, "Hey, Gillian, I love how you've got this conviction. I really want to get that for me. What would be one thing I can start to do now to move in that direction?"
I would say pay attention to the things you can't let go of. You know, the ideas, the things that energize you, the things that when you know, like if there's a headline and news about it, you're like, oh, I want to read more about that. Or if there's conversation happening, you find yourself drawn to it and participating. Like, what are those things that really energize you, that you care deeply about and that are consistently showing up for you?
One of the previous guests, Katie Hare, talks about what makes you angry. And listen to that, because there's an energy there that you care about something. Yeah. That's awesome. All right. So this has been a rich conversation, one of many. I hope, I suspect there's a lot of gold in here for people listening. It's definitely for me. One of the things I'm taking is that the conviction takes work, right? You got to earn it. If you care about something, then you got to have that wrestle. And I've observed you wrestling over the years, and you know you continue to ask big questions about, well, how else could I serve? You know, it's very inspiring.
I think one of the things you do that supports that massively is, whether it's in change makers or just, you know, the way we are, you know, together, is that you create space and you help people create space to kind of keep asking those questions, whether it's through change makers or through just one-on-one conversations, is that you create space for people to do that sense making, and you value it so deeply that it gives other people permission to do that work. And I think it's really important to kind of acknowledge that and honor it. Yeah.
Thank you. I always love to ask this question in service of that, actually, at the end of a conversation. Now, what have you learned or maybe been reminded of during this conversation?
Oh, so many things. I think one of the things that unexpectedly came out for me in this conversation was where my passion for HR began. It began in a really rough experience, or the aftermath of a rough experience, and then studying HR, it gave me the antidote to what I'd experienced that was so hard, you know. And I think that really drove my passion for my profession in a way that I've locked onto and never let go of. So thank you for that. That was really nice to reconnect with that part of the story. I hope other HR people listening to this can relate to that too.
I think they will, and that really warms my heart to hear that insight. And for people interested to connect with you, to get your book, Flexperts, just to have a conversation with you, how can people find you?
A couple of ways. They can go to my website, which is gillianbrooks.co.nz, and check out my book and my online course there if you're interested in managing a flexible team with a bit more ease. Or check me out on LinkedIn. I'm quite easy to find there too. So I look forward to connecting with you if you want to do that.
This conversation with Gillian's got me thinking that conviction matters. And what really was impressed upon me as we had our conversation together was that Gillian stands for something, not just against something. She stands for a better future of work so people can have more choices and have a greater sense of well-being. That's what she's standing for. She's not just standing against. It reminds me of the Buckminster Fuller quote. If you want to change the system, don't push against or tear down the old model, create a new model that makes the old model obsolete. And I reckon that's what Gillian is contributing to. And I love the idea of listening to what you can't let go of. I'm in the process of thinking about my next decade and what does that mean for my work and what's important now. And I'm listening to the ideas that spark in conversations I have with people that really excite me and the ones I keep coming back to. So if you're someone who is wondering about what am I about and what's my sense of purpose and how do I want to do good work in the world, there's some good questions and practices in this episode, I reckon. I'm wondering what else this has got you thinking. I'd love to hear. Drop me a line and tell me, digby@digbyscott.com. What's this got you wondering as well? And also, I would love it if it inspired you in any way, then please share the episode with one other person and get a conversation going. And also share the podcast with them, because the more we get these sort of ideas out into the world, I reckon the world becomes a slightly better place each episode. Until next time, go well. This is Dig Deeper, and I'm Digby Scott. We'll see you again soon.